So I would like to say thank you to everyone for joining this webinar today on presenting one of the results of the MSP for Blue Growth Study, the Visions Handbook for Developing Visions for MSP, prepared by the European MSP platform. My name is Claire Waldman, and I work in the central office of the EU MSP platform at s.Pro Sustainable Projects in Berlin. Before we get into the content of the webinar, there are just a few logistical matters that I'd like to mention. One is that we have muted the participants on the webinar today to reduce audio interference, to make sure that you can hear myself and Ivana Lucic, who will be presenting shortly, loud and clear. I would also like to point out the chat window in the GoToMeeting panel. This is where you can submit questions during the course of the webinar and also let us know if you have any technical issues. Please feel free to type them into the chat window. And I would also like to let everyone know that we are recording the webinar today so that it can be archived on the MSP platform website. And we will make the slides that we share today available upon request. Okay, so with that, I think we can go ahead and get started with the content of the webinar. Just to provide a bit of structure, I will start out with a brief introduction to the MSP platform as well as the MSP for Blue Growth Study. And then I will turn it over to Ivana, my co-presenter, who will give an introduction to the Visions Handbook. And then we will have about 30 minutes for questions and answers from all of you so that we can wrap up by 5. So to start with information on the EU MSP platform, we provide technical assistance to EU member states and to the European Commission in the implementation of the EU MSP directive, which states that all coastal EU member states are required to prepare cross-sectoral maritime spatial plans by 2021. I'd also like to provide a small disclaimer that we are not EU employees, so the information and views that we are sharing today do not represent the European Commission's official opinion. So we offer a variety of services as part of the EU MSP platform. This includes access to a team of dedicated experts who provide advice and knowledge on MSP-specific topics. We also maintain a website, mspplatform.eu, which includes diverse resources on implementing MSP. We also run a question and answer service where our expert team can answer specific questions and provide examples of MSP practice across Europe. And most relevant to the webinar today is that we develop technical studies intended to fill knowledge gaps on how to conduct maritime spatial planning. This webinar will cover one output from the MSP for Blue Growth Study, which was published earlier this year. And finally, we also organize a variety of events to support knowledge exchange. These include the Member State Expert Group on Maritime Spatial Planning meetings, as well as conferences and workshops on specific topics. Just a bit about how we are organized. We have expertise distributed throughout Europe, with focal points in each European sea basin, which you can see up here on this slide. And we have central offices here at s.Pro in Berlin, as well as with Icarus based in Brussels. I'd also like to share a bit about our website, which is fairly extensive. We have a collection of practical experiences related to conducting maritime spatial planning, including tools for developing visions for MSP, which Ivana will present shortly. On our website, you can also find overviews of MSP in EU countries, as well as at the sea basin level to find out the latest about progress in MSP developments throughout Europe. On our website, we also promote funding opportunities, news, and events relevant to MSP, and we also provide documentation from the events that we organize. Through our website, you can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter, and we also encourage you to follow us on Twitter to find out the latest that's going on with MSP in Europe. Okay, so with that background information, I'd like to share a bit about the MSP for Blue Growth study, which is the focus of this webinar and 2 other webinars that we will be hosting in the next few weeks. As part of the MSP platform services in 2017, our team developed this study for the European Commission. And the overall aim of the MSP for Blue Growth study was to provide information on how MSP can help member states deliver sustainable growth for their maritime economies. And the study was designed to provide member states with practical guidance in 3 distinct aspects of MSP. These were organized around the 3 study questions shown on this slide. The first one being how to develop a vision for maritime space that can be effectively used in MSP. And this resulted in the output of the Handbook for Developing Visions in MSP that Ivana will talk about today. The other study questions included what kind of future trends impact on sector development and how do they influence the MSP process. The result of answering this question was the development of 9 maritime sector fiches, which can be found on the MSP platform website in our MSP sectors section. And finally, the third study question is how can MSP authorities monitor whether they are on the right track with their MSP objectives? And to answer this, we developed a handbook for developing a system of indicators, and this can also be found on our website. These 3 outputs together are intended to support MSP processes at different stages of the MSP cycle, and they're all designed to be used in a given context. So they're not prescriptive, but rather provide information and suggestions that should be customized for an individual MSP process. While there were these 3 main tools resulting from the study, there are some main conclusions that can be drawn out by looking at the 3 outputs together. One of them is that visions are really about planning for the future, and these can provide an overarching framework for an integrated maritime policy in general, as well as promote collaboration among various maritime sectors. Another conclusion is the importance of communicating the benefits of MSP to the sectors, and that it's important to share how MSP is a tool to support both emerging and mature sectors. And finally, indicators can be used to help link MSP and blue growth processes, with the consideration that MSP itself has limitations to keep in mind. Okay, in addition to this webinar today, as I mentioned earlier, we are organizing 2 other webinars. One presenting the sector fiches for the 9 maritime sectors, to be held on November 21st, coming up in 2 weeks, as well as another webinar on December 5th, presenting the Handbook for Developing MSP Indicators. I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to also sign up for these webinars if you're interested in learning more about these outputs, or you can also find them on the MSP platform website. Okay, so with that, I would like to turn over the presentation to Ivana, who is going to share more information about the Visions Handbook.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, and thanks to everyone who is online with us today. Yeah, I hope everyone can see my screen clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. So my name is Ivana Lukic, and I'm working together with Claire, and I will tell you a bit more about the handbook for developing visions in maritime spatial planning. So first to say, the technical study maritime spatial planning for blue growth was published almost a year now, and as Claire said, is available on our website. So the study has 3 parts, and today we are talking about parts that is referring to visions, or rather handbook for developing visions in MSP. So first, why are we at all talking about this link between MSP and blue growth, and what is the role of MSP in regards to blue growth? First of all, maritime spatial plan as a final product puts on the same map current uses, future demands, current conflicts, and also it reserves some areas for nature protection as well as for the use of future generations. On the other hand, MSP as a process brings people together, brings stakeholders together, and serves as the mechanism for stakeholder engagement, putting the people around the same table to discuss opportunities and best options for the space in question. So MSP actually has a double role here. So first of all, to reduce current and avoid future conflicts, and then also on the other hand to set the scene for the sea as a development area and source of national and regional competitiveness. So in this context, development of vision is useful for taking this forward-looking approach in planning and for agreeing on priorities and directions for maritime spatial planning. Therefore, a vision process is highly interlinked with planning for blue growth. Now, so for the handbook on how to develop visions in MSP, we focused on the following questions. First, we kind of did a review. We wanted to know what kind of visions have been developed already across the EU in the maritime context, in the context of MSP, and what are the lessons learned and good practices and tools that have been used in these processes. So this was also to advise on how to design an optimal vision process. It is important to mention that the handbook itself is providing only orientations and ideas, so it provides a palette of tools and practices that planners can choose, basically pick and choose from. So it's not prescribing, it's rather just providing a palette of opportunities for planners to choose from. And it can also help those developing the terms of reference for the development of vision. For example, if vision process or if a part of it is being outsourced. Now, the study approach, when it comes to study approach, study methodology, we focus on over 30 processes across the EU. So be it statutory, voluntary, different geographical scales, either part of the maritime spatial planning process, MSP relevant, or we even looked at some vision processes that were developed as part of national development strategies, and so on. We did this in order to really try and pick some solutions, some practices that could be also transferable to maritime spatial planning context. So we also had extensive engagement and validation of the study, and this was done through various workshops, also conferences, and engagement with maritime spatial planning experts group. We also had over 50 interviews with those who have developed visions in the MSP context, or those who have facilitated the process, or those who were involved in the process, and so on. And this was to really pick up on those lessons learned and good practices, tools, and so on to advise the handbook development process. So already at this stage, it's important to note that already at this stage, we were seeking to have a kind of a good distribution across all the sea basins. So we wanted to analyze similar number of processes across all the sea basins, but we thought that this is impossible because some sea basins, of course, have a longer tradition when it comes to sea planning, when it comes to developing visions, also when it comes to transnational and joint processes in regards to vision. This is, for example, the case in the Baltic Sea that really has a long tradition. And processes such as, for example, Balsiplan vision have helped also the national processes when it comes to really defining the terms to be used later in the MSP, defining joint topics of interest and joint principles. So on the other hand, sea basin, Black Sea Basin, we noticed that MSP is just starting, so initiatives on MSP are just starting. And in the Black Sea, it was very relevant for us to really learn what are their questions there, and what are the needs, what are the questions that they would like to know in regards to development of visions. And this was to advise their future or ongoing processes. Another thing that we also noticed right away is that is the fact that terms vision, strategy, roadmap, action plan, and so on are used quite arbitrary. And this is an interesting fact given that general management literature clearly defines boundaries between these terms and practices then and also tools used for each of these. So first step then for us was to actually define these terms. We did that together with stakeholders, with those who had developed these processes. And what we noticed that these mainly differ in regards to their implementation. So for example, strategy and an action plan are meant to really be implemented, while on the other hand, we cannot really implement the vision, but rather adhere to it, refer to it, and actively use it. Okay, so what is the purpose overall of vision in MSP? So of course, depending on the local conditions and aims, the vision process can be employed for different purposes. In some cases, the process, the vision development process itself is more important than final document because it presents a mechanism for stakeholder engagement and it facilitates the dialogue on a joint future. In other cases, the final document is crucial if it, for example, provides statutory norms and principles. And sometimes joint development of scenario or a forecast can serve well to actually raise an awareness about about an emerging issue. And this was an example in scenarios and forecasts that were developed as part of s.Scope project to communicate potential impacts that a sandbank might have on local businesses and environment in Knokke-Heist in Belgium. So this was a really good way to communicate an importance for future planning, an importance of taking some action, or otherwise there are different scenarios of what might happen. So where MSP is a new concept, vision process can serve as a warm-up for an actual MSP, and it can encourage stakeholders to really start thinking outside of their sectoral bubbles and to consider longer timescales. So the handbook itself offers planners this decision-making framework. So a review of all the different visions, scenarios, and so on. So now whenever I say vision, I mean these different processes, forward-looking processes. So the vision is based on this framework, which basically collects different tools, practices, and so on. And the framework is there to allow planners, to help planners to prepare for a vision process more systematically, or as I said, to prepare the terms of reference for those who will be developing a vision. So it basically presents a palette of possibilities for planning different types of visions and other forward-looking processes. So in this framework, the framework has two parts. So the handbook itself has two parts as well. So so-called preparatory actions are basically some decisions that planners has to take early on, such as, for example, what should be the temporal scope of a vision. So are we looking far as 2050, or maybe some shorter scales, such as 2030, and so on. Then also what resources and skills are needed for one vision process that we're planning to have. And these decisions are directly then affecting which tools and which methods will we use to actually build our process, to build our vision. So these so-called building blocks or steps and elements of an actual vision or a strategy are also then presented in the second part of the handbook. So these are, for example, different methods for analyzing the future. So be it different types of scenarios that have been used, so some more focused on numerical methods, modeling, simulations, and so on, or other ones that are a bit more elaborated with words, with movies, a bit more entertaining, and so on. Also the forecasts, etc. So what are the different elements that have been used across the EU for different types of processes? Then also it looks at, for example, stakeholder engagement as one of the building blocks as well. And in this context, methods and means of stakeholder engagement are also presented. So when it comes to stakeholder engagement, we can see this distinction between local versus sea-based and wide processes. So for example, on the local level, what can be noticed is that overall, on the local level, engagement might be a bit easier and less time or resources consuming, and the feeling of ownership can easily be developed. This is based on an example of Martin's strategy for 4 municipalities in Sweden. So here, the strategy was co-developed with a wide range of industrial and research actors. And in this example, stakeholders really feel that they're in a driving seat. And it's important to note that this is actually a continuous and ongoing process where stakeholders often meet and discuss future opportunities. They're revising the actions and jointly monitoring progress and identifying new opportunities. So it's a continuous process. It's not one-time exercise. On the other hand, the sea basin-wide process, such was the Celtic Sea's future trends, engagement comes a bit more as a challenge. First of all, because of the wide geographical scope. So a lesson learned from this process, for example, is that a neutral spokesperson for engaging stakeholders is very relevant. especially if we are to engage industry. In that case, it might not be so suitable to have, for example, an environmental NGO engaging industry and being the spokesperson for the process. Now, when it comes to this process as well, another lesson learned is that it's also very relevant to monitor and track progress of engagement and also resources that are spent on it, and to balance these engaging efforts. So really to see who did we plan to engage and then to compare it with who did we succeed to actually engage, who was difficult, and for example, was it worth it in some cases or not, and in which cases the targeted approach should be taken. If, for example, some parties or some type of stakeholders is missing, should we have a more tailored and targeted approach for them? So engaging stakeholders is one thing, but really keeping them engaged and having this co-development process is totally another challenge. And in this context, it's very important to communicate the vision, to communicate scenarios in the right way, and in a way that a wider range of stakeholders can understand it, and also to, in some sense, make it entertaining for them, and as I said, easy to understand. So, for example, GOFRE process in Belgium is an example how a vision and scenarios can be communicated in an easy and appealing way. So, in this case, instead of complex GS maps, the process actually used simpler structural maps to communicate and present in an easy to understand manner. And this was really a good way to communicate the scenarios and make sure that everyone understands it and everyone is on board. On the other hand, the national scenario development process in the Netherlands use the joint mapping exercises, which we can see actually on the slide on my right side. And for example, the national Dutch scenario process also developed a movie in order to really communicate to a wider range of stakeholders and make the process appealing for them. Then the handbook also provides examples from some not so maritime related processes, but these were we thought that these are very relevant because some of the tools and practices used are quite replicable also to MSP context. So for example, the Wales We Want vision process, the national vision process, in Wales has engaged a number of voluntary local leaders, so-called local champions, and the local champions then communicated and advocated for the process locally. So it's quite an innovative way of distributing this engagement. And the process was very well also documented. It's documented in a handbook, and it has provided lots of innovative techniques and tools as well. Okay, so one of the often stated challenges in regards to visions, but also in regards to MSP, is how to actually ensure resilience and continuity of a process. So engagement of politicians was also quite relevant in this regard, because it can happen that with changes of the political mandate, the process simply does not continue. So co-development of the process and of the vision with a wider range of actors, including also private, so meaning the industry and international organizations, and also external funders, not only the public funds, can actually ensure resilience and continuity of one such vision process. And this is quite relevant because ideally a vision process should aim to be a closed loop and a continuous improvement process that can track its progress over time, and maybe also make use of indicators. About indicators, you will learn more in our third webinar. So with this, I'm finishing. I would like to again mention that whole study is available on our MSP platform website, and also a handbook, which is also well designed and easy to read, is also available on the MSP platform website. So that's pretty much it. I welcome your questions. If you haven't sent them through already, please do so. And Claire will read these questions to me, and we can continue. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ivana, for sharing all of this interesting information that you collected in the visions development, in the vision handbook development process. While we're waiting for some questions to come in through the chat box, maybe I could ask a couple of questions myself about the visions handbook. I'm curious to know what was the source of the visions studied? Did they mostly come from projects or from national processes or other types of processes?
Okay, thank you, Claire, for your first question. I also very much encourage others to ask questions. Don't be shy, please do so. Yeah, we use a wide range of sources. So of course we use projects as well. So some of these were one-time exercise. However, in some cases the projects were the vision exercises were taken forward. It's interesting to say, for example, in Belgium, the vision itself is being revised, and now it's added to their revised new MSP. So in some cases, these national processes have really had continuity and so on. Yeah, so I think I would say it's quite equal distribution between the projects and then national processes.
Okay, good to know. We have had one question come in so far from Quado that says, in designing an MSP vision by a member state, are they to consider the sea basin they fall in, since the blue growth agenda for the EU sea basins is different? For example, the Mediterranean Sea and the Baltic Sea have different agendas. Did you, Ivana, take a look at the differences or how sea basin strategies are considered in these national visions?
I think that sea basin strategies, as well as also some of the vision processes developed as for example, part of projects, are taken into consideration in national maritime spatial plan or national processes. First of all, when it comes to really defining some terms, because I think everyone aims to have some coherency with their neighboring states, also when it comes to which terms they're using, how these terms are defined in the MSP context, but then also to kind of advise your process in regards to common principles and common goals. So what are the common goals and principles in the sea basin? Because of course, always the joint action is stronger. So I think these, let's say, sea basin visions or strategies and so on were kind of important also as a process to really define what issues are of common interest and which actions can be taken jointly by member states. And of course, such processes also are quite relevant for improving the transnational cooperation, which is also one of the important aspects of MSP.
Yeah, that last point on transnational cooperation is really important, as you mentioned. And it's also something that for the audience to know that this year, the MSP platform is developing a study on cross-border consultation and how the member states work with each other to aim to have coherence among their maritime spatial plans with their neighboring countries. So we'll have more information on that study coming out towards the end of this year in a few months. Okay, we have one more question that's come in, which is how and when should stakeholders be involved in the formulation of an MSP vision, since the government at the national level formulates the vision and policies for countries without consultation? Ivana, do you have some thoughts on this?
I definitely do. I have lots of thoughts. I have to say this is a complex question, really. And this is something we're often asked and which I see being often discussed at workshops and so on. Also, one thing to note is that countries are taking also different approaches, but it is often the case that main objectives and let's say main vision is defined on the top level, and then some consultation takes place down the line. However, there are examples also where this is more a bottom-up approach and it's kind of jointly co-developed. So I think that, you know, at this broader scale, going top down, some things can be developed at the beginning, but then in order for actions to really be implemented and in order to have the wider commitment, stakeholder engagement is really important, because government themselves, they cannot take all the actions alone, so they really need stakeholders. They need industry, they need researchers, they need people willing to really take these actions jointly. So I would not be able to say when is the right time. It also depends, I think, on tradition of cooperation with stakeholders in a given country. But I can say that Handbook gives lots of examples which then practitioners can kind of learn from and really see what kind of approach to propose to their government or yeah.
Okay, great. Is there any example that you can think of off the top of your head that you might suggest participants look into as a best practice for stakeholder engagement in the vision development process?
Funnily enough, I think I think I mentioned one case which is not so much MSP and maybe even not so much maritime related, but is very well documented, and it provides lots of tools and practices that are not so far so much used in MSP. Because if we are reviewing the MSP processes, visions, and so on, we can notice that some of the tools are quite repetitive and kind of stay in these circles of maritime and MSP processes. But this, for example, Wales We Won't vision process is quite interesting because it provides some innovative ways of engaging stakeholders, and it's really a bottom-up approach. So yeah, it's definitely something a bit innovative to look at, and I'm sure that many of these practices can be replicable in the MSP context. Then Belgium vision process have had also a very extensive stakeholder engagement process. They had 3 working groups, one on multi-use and the environment, and so on. So I think in this case, the stakeholder engagement was very extensive. So all the work that was done was at the end handed to the government, and of course the final decision was with them. But it has definitely very much advised the process and the final decision, because at the end of the day, it's something to be taken into consideration in the decision-making process of the government.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing those examples for folks to take a further look at. We have had another question come in, which is the vision development process is also part of a recent framework on transition management for marine governance towards an ecosystem-based management governance. Such research makes regards to institutional change, once institutions maybe be the big barriers in protecting the marine environment. Do you see it happening through the MSP process? So I think this question is related to the role of institutions maybe I think also research institutions in the vision process.
Okay. I think the change management, I mean, all these are my personal opinions that are also advised by the study and so on. So yeah, I think the change management and institutional change management, and as mentioned in this question, is very relevant in this regard. So, for example, in the handbook, we have looked at a theory of change management, and we try to incorporate in a handbook some of the practices that are generally used in the change management, such as, for example, force field analysis. Um, yeah, I think that's something definitely to be also taken further in MSP, because yeah, MSP itself is a plan. So planning itself might in some cases need really a radical change, or yeah. So that will be basically my answer now.
Yeah, I think getting people to think about what change they want in the future as part of a vision process does require institutions to really rethink their roles and responsibilities as well. Okay, one more question that's come in. You, Ivana, mentioned the Wales We Want and the Belgium vision process as being very well documented. Is there an example of a national vision procedure that has shown quick results? I think here results might mean quick development of a vision document.
Quick development of a vision document, I'm not quite sure about, but showing quick results, I think this is more relevant perhaps on the local level. I have mentioned 4 municipalities in Sweden, and that's something where results are results are happening quite quickly, because first of all, it's a local process. The stakeholders feel as in a driving seat. Industry is also engaged, a wide range of research institutions and so on. So they have meetings very often, and they're discussing which actions can be taken in the future jointly, which actions have been taken already, and so on. So I think the more local level it is, the quicker the results could be seen. However, this also very much depends on the communication of the process. So whenever we have the vision in hands, the process shouldn't end. We should really then disseminate and communicate it well in order to really ensure that everyone is on board and everyone is using it very much. However, vision as such is not really to be implemented. That's more, let's say, related to action plans or strategies. So vision is more to be a guiding document, something that is actively used, and so on.
Okay, thanks. I actually have a follow-up question based upon what you just said, especially the differences between national and local level. I can imagine that at the national level, for a national vision, it might be somewhat challenging to engage a broad audience of stakeholders. And I was just curious about what were some of the channels or methods that were used to engage stakeholders as part of some of these national vision processes?
Okay, thank you, Claire. So I mentioned the Belgium vision process, which actually had 3 working groups that were also led by a wide range of national institutions, so be it also research institutes, different ministries, and so on. So I think that maybe also spreading the process in that way might be quite useful. So not only have it centralized and having one spokes organization, but also kind of trying for different maybe topics to engage different institutions. And in this way, we're really developing then a network where really the process is communicated much wider. So and Belgian vision process I wouldn't know the number on the top of my head, but I think um, it has engaged a large number of stakeholders from very different fields. So be it industry, from the government, from different institutions, from the research, and so on.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that information. And it's interesting to hear about this network approach to spreading information about the vision through these working groups and then down to other levels. We still have time for a few more questions from the participants today. I would just also like to add, maybe Ivana, if you could go back to your previous slide. So not this last slide with your email address, but the one before.
I can try.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Just so folks have the URL website address where you can find the MSP for Blue Growth study and the 3 outputs that were developed, both the Visions Handbook as well as the sector fiches and the indicators handbook. Seems like maybe folks have asked all of the questions that they wanted to ask for today. So with that, I would just like to encourage you one more time to sign up for the other 2 webinars that we have planned on sectors coming up in 2 weeks on November 21st, as well as the Indicators Handbook on December 5th. I see actually one more question has come in. This one says, did any of the documents state how they went about the identification of the needs or wants to develop the MSP vision? So I guess the motivating factors for developing an MSP vision.
Yeah, I wouldn't know on the top of my head to say a concrete example of a process, but we do definitely have under background research. So it's first building block, which actually analyzes these overall objectives and so on. So basically does the identification of needs and wants in regards to MSP and division. So I'm sure that lots of examples could be found there. So various matrices are used for that, and then the handbook also specifies which sources are usually used for that. Then when it comes to stakeholder identification, it also, because really in order to identify the needs and wants, it's very relevant to identify who the stakeholders are. So the handbook also has so-called building block on stakeholder identification, and it also provides lots of different tools and practices in regards to really doing this in a more systematic way in order to ensure that really, let's say, everyone's concerns are taken into account.
Thanks for that. And maybe, Pato, we could follow up with you separately with some examples of documents where the motivations for developing a vision have been stated. I also, related to that, was curious if, in addition to stating the motivations for developing a vision, was there also clear identification of the benefits for having a vision? I know you have included this in the vision handbook, but I would be interested to know how these benefits were shared with stakeholders, since they, in order to invest their own resources and time into a vision development process should be aware of the benefits as well.
Yeah, when it comes to engagement, I think this is one of the crucial points, really, to communicate the benefits in order to have people on board. I've mentioned that, for example, development of scenarios can increase the awareness about emerging issues. So in that sense, the importance of planning also is communicated through these scenarios or vision processes. Yeah, and I'm sure that every document really provided a rationale of why they're developing it, why is it needed, and what are then the benefits down the line. Is it part of the broader strategic process, and how it will then later on advise other processes down the line. But it's definitely one of the crucial steps in each vision process, I would say.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. So I think then we're about ready to wrap up. Once again, I encourage everyone to visit the MSP platform website to take a look at the Visions Handbook. I also would like to mention that we have a fairly extensive FAQ section on the MSP platform website, and we have an FAQ on Visions for MSP that provides kind of a preview into some of the content of the Visions Handbook as well. So with that, thank you to everyone for joining us today, and thanks especially to Ivana for sharing her work on the Visions Handbook, and hopefully it's been an informative session for everyone and will help you in your work going forward on MSP.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thanks to you for this great moderation as well. And I would just like to remind everyone that you're always welcome to email us if you have any additional questions, either through the website form or directly to my or Claire's email. So we can always follow up with an additional answers. So yeah, do not hesitate to do so.
Yes, thank you for that reminder as well, Ivana. Okay, with that, take care, everyone, and have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.